Right, so hello and welcome back to Favourites Week, and today I'm going to be talking about my top 5 favourite classic novels of all time. Just to start off on a high, I'm going to start off by cheating, because number 5 on my top 5 favourite classics is actually a series of books, and that is the only non-Victorian thing on this list, but it is an absolutely brilliant series and one I'd highly recommend. I don't have the whole series with me, but here are the first 3 books out of the 12, and this is Anthony Powell's book series, A Dance to the Music of Time. Although it is 12 books, it's one story, and they're very kind of cohesive, and it's almost like one giant book, which almost makes it even more incredible. Anthony Powell is like Charles Dickens crossed with Evelyn Waugh, and I love his work very, very much. And the series A Dance to the Music of Time is, as I said, 12 books written between the 1950s and the 1970s and set between the 1920s and the 1970s. And it follows the life of this one man, Nick, and everyone he meets in his life. But what I love about A Dance to the Music of Time, what I really, really love about it is that although Nick is the protagonist, it's not always that much about Nick, especially in the later books. You more just see the world through his perspective, and it's often more about the interesting people he meets than about him, which I think is a really interesting way to tell a story. I also think that the characters conjured in these books are incredible, and the way that these books span such a long period of time is so fascinating, so enjoyable to read, so rewarding, and also so like historically interesting as well. They're brilliant, brilliant series. I love how characters crop up in book 1 and then crop up again in book 6. It's absolutely wonderful, it's so brilliant, and I'm really looking forward to rereading these, hopefully later on this year. I will potentially be hosting a read-along of the series, but I'll talk a bit more about that in the next couple of weeks. My 4th favourite classic, and one of my favourite books of all time, is Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë. I love Wuthering Heights a lot, and it's also the book I know the best. I've read this, I think, about 10 times, which is quite a lot for me. But it is absolutely incredible, and I love it very much. I know it is very derisive, I know not everybody loves it, but for me it is an absolutely incredible book, beautifully written with wonderful dialogue, so powerful, so odd and bizarre, with such weird, layered storytelling, narrative techniques, and such amazing characters that are so horrible, but also you kind of pity as well, and that's what is amazing. Wuthering Heights, if you don't know, is set in the Yorkshire moors at the turn of the century, from the 18th to the 19th century, though it was written about 50 years after that, and it follows 2 families who live in this neighbourhood, the 2 wealthiest families, the Earnshaws and the Lintons, and one day Mr. Earnshaw adopts a little boy who he finds on the streets of Liverpool, who he calls Heathcliff, and Heathcliff goes on to disrupt everything. He forms this very strong, passionate bond with Cathy, his foster sister, and forms a deep hatred with his foster brother Hindley, and then forms deep hatreds with many other people. This is known often as a romance, but as I have said on this channel a few times before, for me, this is more a story of revenge. And although there are moments of great love and passion in this book, it is also a book about revenge and hatred and people being awful to each other, but that is kind of what makes it awesome. I love it so very, very much, and I would absolutely recommend it. I know it's quite well known, but it is just an incredible, incredible book. Not for everyone, but if you take a moment, don't go into it with expectations, and definitely do not expect a love story, and definitely don't watch any of the films that cut out the second half of the book, which is like one of the best bits because there's all this like amazing doubling. Basically, forget what you might have heard and read this amazing book if you haven't already. And if you maybe read it ages ago, maybe reread it because you might like it more on a second reading. I think it is so, so good. I love it so much, and yes, definitely belongs in my top 5 favourite classics. At number 3, I have Dombey and Son by Charles Dickens. This is an incredibly brilliant book, and I think really, really underrated. Charles Dickens is my favourite author, and Dombey and Son is my second favourite of his books, and one I absolutely love. It's called Dombey and Son, but actually it's not about Mr. Dombey and it's not about Mr. Dombey's son, it is about Mr. Dombey's daughter. Mr. Dombey is a businessman, and all Mr. Dombey really cares about in life is his business and its success, and the fact that he has a son who he wants to carry on his business and who he wants to lead his business into success. All he cares about is his son. He doesn't care about his daughter because she is a girl, and he doesn't think the girls matter. But there is a lot more to the plot in this, as you can tell. It's quite a long book, but one of the reasons why I love Dombey and Son so much is that I think it's one of Dickens's most interesting books in terms of gender. It's a book about the dismissal of girls from Victorian society because that society favours boys. It's a book about the unfairness of marriage sometimes and the poor situations it can lead women into. And it's also a book about gender roles within Victorian society. The book is almost set up as a dichotomy between Florence and her father. Florence, who is everything a typical good Victorian woman should be. She is emotional, she cares about people, she loves deeply even when people don't like her. She's clever, she's resourceful, but she also cares massively about people, and she's also very, very patient. Florence's main characteristics is in many ways love, in comparison to her father, who who is everything a typical Victorian male would be, i.e. very, very repressed, very, very unemotional, caring nothing for his family, caring only for business. And what this book does in a really interesting way is set up this dichotomy between traditional masculinity and femininity in Victorian literature, in which femininity wins, and it's really interesting. So yes, I've probably talked about this one for long enough, but definitely one I would recommend. This is a wonderful book, really, really interesting, quite different to a lot of the rest of Dickens, and one I would highly recommend. At number 2, we have the amazing North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell, another brilliant Victorian book. I have referred to this many times as Pride and Prejudice and Industrialisation, or Pride and Prejudice and Mills, because the central love story is a little bit like Pride and Prejudice, but it also combines that sort of Pride and Prejudice setup with amazing, fascinating social criticism and writing about the Industrial Revolution in Britain and how industrialisation affects various people. And it's also a book about death and grief and about so many other things, and it is really, really brilliant. It follows Margaret, who has grown up in the rural south of England, and what happens when her father moves her and her family to the north of England, to an industrial manufacturing town, where Margaret meets a man called John Thornton, who runs a factory and who kind of stands for everything she disagrees with. It's so wonderful. It's beautifully, beautifully written. I think John Thornton is one of the best created characters in literature, though I kind of feel like that about every character that Gaskell ever wrote. And Margaret too is a wonderful, enjoyable heroine. There are passages in this book that move me so deeply. It's beautifully written, it's wonderfully put together, it is a brilliant love story, but also the social criticism is so interesting, so fascinating, and done so well, and I can't recommend this enough. Elizabeth Gaskell is a wonderful author, and this book is just immense and wonderful and very, very brilliant. And finally, my favourite classic and my favourite book of all time, you all know this by now, it is Our Mutual Friend by Charles Dickens, which I love very, 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 very dearly. This is Dickens' final finished book, and one that I absolutely adore. It follows a fortune going round in society. A man called Mr. Harmon dies, and he's made his money in rubbish by collecting rubbish and going through it looking for things that are of value. And when he dies, he leaves his fortune to his son. But on his son's journey back from abroad, that son, the young Mr. Harmon, is found drowned. And everything goes on from there, and the book basically follows all of the people that this fortune touches. The servant couple who end up inheriting this fortune, the lawyer who is sort of working out what's going on with this fortune, the woman who the son returning was supposed to marry, man and his daughter who find the body of the drowned man, and so many other people that this fortune touches. It's a complex and deep and fascinating book with wonderful characters, interesting themes, and so many beautiful scenes and passages. I love it very, very dearly. I won't talk too much about it here because I've already spoken about it quite a lot. In fact, because of the read-along I hosted recently, the Victorian style serialised read-along over the course of 18 months, there is, I think, about 8 hours of footage on YouTube of me talking about this book. So, you know, if you really want to hear me talk more about this book, there's a lot of that, like an awful, awful lot of it. So I think I probably don't need to talk much more about Our Mutual Friend here, but suffice to say, I love this book very, very dearly. I would definitely recommend it. So that's it. Those are my top 5 favourite classics. Thank you very much for watching this part of Favourites Week, and tomorrow I'll be back to talk about my top 5 favourite contemporary and modern novels.